Captain Hana stood behind the thick glass wall, watching the testing room below. Her forearms crossed over her chest as she studied the data screens floating in front of her. The Velthari had been running these tests for over 300 years. Every new species that joined the Galactic Federation had to go through them. It was the law. Today was special. The humans were finally being tested. 3 months ago, the Galactic Council had voted to accept Earth into the Federation. Many species had complained. The humans were young, they said, too primitive, too violent. But the vote had passed, and now here they were. Hana looked down at the human sitting in the testing chair. His name was Minho, according to the files. He was about average height for his species, with dark hair and calm eyes. He wore the standard, gray testing suit that all new species had to wear. His hands rested on his knees, and he looked relaxed. "Begin test sequence 1, Hana said into her communication device. The testing room filled with a soft blue light. Holographic images began to appear around Minho. First came images of his home world. Earth looked peaceful enough from space. Blue oceans, white clouds, green and brown land masses. But Hana knew better. She had read the reports about Earth. It was a death world, a planet where everything tried to kill everything else. Minho smiled as he looked at the images of his planet. The sensors showed his heart rate staying normal. His brain activity was calm. This was expected. All species reacted well to images of home. Test sequence 2, Hana announced. The images changed. Now, the room showed predators from different worlds, giant creatures with sharp teeth and claws, flying monsters with acid breath, swimming nightmares from the deepest oceans. These images usually made new species nervous. Their heart rates would go up. They would sweat or shake or show other signs of fear. Minho looked at each image with interest. He even leaned forward to get a better look at some of them. The sensors showed his heart rate going up slightly, but not much. His brain activity showed curiosity, not fear. "Interesting," said Dr. Keth, the head scientist. He was a tall, thin being with gray skin and large black eyes. "The human shows very little fear response. Perhaps their neural development is more primitive than we thought." Hana nodded. That made sense. Primitive species often did not understand danger until it was too late. It was one reason why so many young species did not survive long in space. "Test sequence 3, she said. This was the real test, the room filled with images and sounds that triggered deep, ancient fears. Dark spaces that seemed to move. Whispers, in languages that hurt to hear. Shapes that the mind could not quite understand. These were things that scared every intelligent species. They were built into the very nature of consciousness itself. Most new species would start to panic at this point. Some would try to leave the room. Others would curl up in a ball. A few would even pass out from fear. It was normal. It was expected. It showed that they understood real danger. Minho sat quietly and watched. The sensors showed his heart rate, going up a little more. His breathing got slightly faster, but he did not try to leave. He did not curl up. He did not pass out. He just watched with the same calm interest he had shown before. "His fear response is definitely active," Dr. Keth said, looking at the readings. "But his behavior does not match. Very strange. Maybe their species learned to hide fear as a survival trait," suggested Dr. Yuna, another scientist. She was from the insect-like hive-tar species. "Some prey animals do this." Hana made notes on her data pad. That was possible. If humans were a prey, species on their death world hiding fear might help them survive. "Test sequence 4, she announced. The final test was the worst. Images of cosmic horror filled the room, things from beyond the galaxy, entities that existed in dimensions that normal minds could not understand. Just looking at these images had driven some species to madness. They were only shown for a few seconds, and only to species that seemed mentally strong enough to handle them. The images flashed for exactly 3 seconds. Minho blinked, then tilted his head like he was thinking about something. The sensors showed his fear response spiking, but then it settled back down to almost normal levels. Did he just get used to it? Dr. Yuna asked, staring at her screens. That should not be possible, Dr. Keth replied. No species adapts to cosmic horror imagery that quickly. The testing ended. The lights returned to normal. Minho stood up and stretched like he had been sitting too long. A guard opened the door to let him out. How did I do? Minho asked the guard. His voice was friendly and casual. The scientist will tell you later, the guard replied. Okay, cool, Minho said. Hey, do you guys have any harder tests? That was interesting, but I was kind of expecting something more challenging. The guard stared at him. More challenging? Yeah, really scary stuff. My little sister could probably handle what you just showed me. Minho grinned. But thanks anyway. It was fun. He walked out of the testing area, leaving the guard standing there with his mouth open. Up in the observation room, Hana and the other scientists looked at each other. Did he just say his little sister could handle cosmic horror imagery? Dr. Yuna asked. I think he did, Hana replied slowly. Should we test his sister? Dr. Keth wondered out loud. Hana looked back at her data pad. The readings were all there. Minho had definitely felt fear. His body had reacted to the scary images, but somehow he had not let that fear control him. He had just dealt with it. She had never seen anything like it in 300 years of testing. Put him down as psychologically underdeveloped but compliant, she told Dr. Keth. We will figure out what makes humans different later. For now, they passed the basic tests. But as she filed her report, Hana could not shake the feeling that she was missing something important. Something about the way Minho had looked at those final images. Like he had seen things like them before. Like maybe Earth really was as dangerous as the reports said. And maybe humans were not primitive at all. Maybe they were something else entirely. Something that could look at cosmic horror and ask for more. Dr. Sora checked her equipment one more time as the research ship Harmony's Edge moved into orbit around planet Kethvar. The dead world spun slowly below them, its gray surface covered in the ruins of an ancient civilization. No one knew what had happened to the people who built those cities. They had just vanished one day, leaving behind only empty buildings and strange artifacts. Are you sure about this? Asked Dr. Nelu, her research partner. The tall, blue-skinned scientist was already nervous, and they had not even landed yet. The last 3 teams that studied this planet all came back changed. That is why we are here, Sora replied, to find out what changed them. The team was small but diverse. Besides Sora and Dr. Nelu, there was Engineer Junho from Earth, Dr. Yira from the crystal world of Silthara, and Security Officer Khan from the warrior planet Mordak. Each species brought different skills and perspectives to the mission. Junho was working on his portable scanner, humming quietly to himself. He seemed excited about the mission, which Sora found odd. Most beings got nervous when dealing with xenoarchaeology sites that had psychological effects. But humans were still new to the galaxy. Maybe they did not understand the dangers yet. The landing was smooth. The ruins stretched out around them like the bones of some massive creature. Tall spires reached toward the gray sky, and strange geometric patterns covered every surface. The air was breathable but felt heavy, like it was pressing down on them. Readings are off the charts, Junho reported, looking at his scanner. These structures are definitely artificial, but the energy signatures are unlike anything in the database. They made their way toward the largest building, a pyramid-like structure at the center of the city. The closer they got, the more uncomfortable Sora felt. It was like someone was watching them. even though they were clearly alone on this dead world. Dr. Yira, the crystal being, suddenly stopped walking. Her normally bright blue color was fading to a dull gray. "Something is wrong here," she said, her voice shaking. "I can feel thoughts that are not mine." "Stay close together." Security. Officer Kan ordered. His hand moved to his weapon, but Sora could see that even the tough warrior was nervous. His green skin had taken on a pale shade. They entered the pyramid through a large doorway. Inside, the walls were covered with more geometric patterns. But these ones seemed to move when you were not looking directly at them. Sora blinked and focused, but the patterns stayed still. Then she would look away and catch movement in her peripheral vision. "The artifacts should be in the central chamber," she said, checking her map. "Just up these stairs." As they climbed, the feeling of being watched got stronger. Dr. Nelu started breathing heavily. "This was a mistake," he muttered. "We should leave. Right now." But they had come too far to turn back. The central chamber was a large, circular room with a domed ceiling. In the center sat a collection of smooth, black objects. They looked like stones, but they hummed with energy. Strange symbols floated in the air above them. "There they are," Sora whispered. As soon as she spoke, the whispers started. They came from everywhere and nowhere, voices speaking in languages that hurt to hear. The words did not make sense, but somehow Sora understood their meaning. They spoke of the emptiness between stars, of how small and meaningless all life was, of the cold, dark future that waited for every civilization. Dr. Nelu fell to his knees, holding his head. "Make it stop," he begged. "Please, make it stop." Dr. Yira's crystal body began to crack. Her light flickered like a dying flame. "We are nothing," she said in a hollow voice. "We build and dream and love, but in the end, we are just dust in an empty universe." Security Officer Khan tried to draw his weapon, but his hands were shaking too badly. The big warrior, who had fought in dozens of battles, was reduced to a frightened child by voices that could not even be heard clearly. Sora felt the despair washing over her like a cold tide. The whispers were right. What was the point of studying ancient civilizations when all civilizations ended the same way? What was the point of learning when knowledge meant nothing in the face of infinite darkness? She was about to give up, to let the whispers take her mind like they had taken so many others, when she noticed Junho. The human was standing right next to the artifacts, scanning them with his equipment. He had his back to the rest of the team, completely focused on his work. The whispers were just as loud near him. They had to be affecting him too. But he was working. "Junho!" Sora called out, fighting against the despair that wanted to drag her down. "Can you hear them?" "Hear what?" he asked, not looking up from his scanner. The whispers, the voices. Junho paused and tilted his head like he was listening. "Oh, those. Yeah, they are pretty intense, really philosophical stuff. Kind of reminds me of my college philosophy class back on Earth. Professor Kim used to say the same things about existential meaninglessness." Sora stared at him. Dr. Nelu was curled up in a ball, crying. Dr. Yira looked like she was about to shatter completely. Kan was backed against the wall, his eyes wide with terror, and Junho was comparing cosmic horror to a college class. "How are you not affected?" she managed to ask. Junho finally looked up from his work. "Affected by what? The depressing voices?" He shrugged. "I mean, they have a point about the universe being big and scary and meaningless. But so what? That does not change the fact that I have a job to do." He went back to scanning the artifacts. "Besides, just because something is meaningless in the cosmic sense does not mean it is meaningless to me. I still have friends and family. I still like pizza and bad movies. The universe being empty does not make my life empty." The whispers seemed to get louder, more urgent. They spoke of death and endings and the futility of hope. Junho nodded along like he was listening to a lecture. Yeah, we all die eventually, he said to the air. Thanks for the reminder. Very helpful. Slowly, carefully, Sora forced herself to stand up. If a human could resist these whispers, maybe she could too. Maybe the key was not to fight them, but to acknowledge them and then keep going anyway. The artifacts are definitely the source, Junho reported. They are broadcasting some kind of psychic field, probably designed to protect this place by driving away intruders. Pretty effective, too. He looked around at the rest of the team. Hey, are you guys okay? You all look terrible. That was when Sora realized something important. The whispers had not driven the ancient civilization away. They had been created by that civilization, as a test, as a barrier, to keep out anyone who could not handle the truth about existence and still keep moving forward. The humans could pass that test, and maybe, just maybe, that made them very special indeed. Commander Nari stood on the bridge of the colony ship New Dawn, staring at the swirling purple clouds of the Maelstrom Nebula. The massive ship carried 15,000 colonists from 12 different species, all heading to establish a new world, on the far side of the galaxy. The nebula was a shortcut that would save them 3 months of travel time. It was also a place where ships disappeared. Commander, we are receiving a distress signal, reported Communications Officer Vex. The insect-like being's antenna twitched with nervousness. It is coming from inside the nebula. Nari frowned. Are you certain? Our long-range scans showed no active ships in this area. I am reading multiple life signs, Vex confirmed. The signal is weak but clear. They are requesting immediate assistance. The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew the stories about the Maelstrom Nebula. Ships went in and never came out. The few that did escape were found drifting empty, their crews missing or dead. No one knew what happened in there, but everyone agreed it was best to stay away. We cannot ignore a distress call, Nari said finally. Prepare a rescue shuttle. I want a small team just in case. Ma'am, I volunteer, said Marine Taehyun. The human stepped forward from his position near the security station. He was young for a soldier, but he had proven himself reliable during the journey. I will go too, added Dr. Jiho, the human medical officer. If there are survivors, they might need immediate treatment. Nari looked at the two humans. They seemed calm, even eager to help. She wondered if they truly understood the danger, or if their species was just too new to space travel to know better. Very well, she decided. Take Security Chief Morgan and Engineer Tethka as well. 4 should be enough for a rescue mission. The shuttle launched an hour later. Nari watched from the bridge as it disappeared into the purple clouds of the nebula. Almost immediately, communication became difficult. The nebula interfered with most electronic signals. Last transmission from the shuttle, Vex reported. They have found the source of the distress call. It is a passenger liner from the Velthari. Trade routes. The ship appears intact, but they are reporting strange readings. After that, silence. For 6 hours, Nari paced the bridge. She had sent 4 of her crew into danger, and now she could not even talk to them. The nebula blocked all attempts at communication. Long-range sensors could not penetrate the interference. Then, suddenly, Vex's antenna shot straight up. Commander, the shuttle is returning. The small craft emerged from the nebula flying fast and erratic. As it got closer, Nari could see damage. To the hull, scorch marks and what looked like claw scratches covered the sides. Shuttle bay, prepare for emergency landing, she ordered. The shuttle crashed more than landed, skidding across the deck before finally stopping. Nari ran to the bay, her heart pounding. The shuttle door opened and Taehyun stumbled out, supporting Security Chief Morgan. The big reptilian was unconscious, his green scales pale with shock. Dr. Jiho came out next, helping Engineer Tethka. The rock-like being was shaking so hard that pieces of his mineral skin were falling off. What happened? Nari demanded. We found the source of the distress call, Taehyun reported. His voice was steady, but she could see sweat on his forehead. The passenger liner was there, just like we thought. But it was not alone. Explain, Dr. Jiho looked up from checking Tethka's vital signs. There are things in the nebula, Commander. Things that feed on fear itself. We barely got out alive. Nari felt a chill run down her spine. Show me. They went to the briefing room, where Taehyun activated the shuttle's recording system. The main screen filled with images from their mission. At first, everything looked normal. The shuttle approaching a large passenger liner floating dead in space. The rescue team boarding through an airlock. Then the recordings got strange. The ship's corridors were filled with a thick, dark mist that seemed to move on its own. Shadows shifted and danced in ways that shadows should not move. And there were sounds, whispers and cries, and something that might have been laughter if laughter could sound evil. The crew was still alive, Jiho explained. But they were changed, paralyzed with fear. Some had been that way for weeks, just standing or sitting in place, too terrified to move. On the screen, the camera showed the liner's bridge. The crew sat at their stations like statues, their eyes wide and empty. They breathed, but they did not respond to anything the rescue team did. And then we met them, Taehyun said quietly. The camera angle shifted as something moved in the mist, a shape that was not quite solid, not quite gas. It flowed like liquid shadow, with what might have been eyes glowing in its dark mass. As it moved closer to Security Chief Morgan, the big reptilian began to shake. Then he started screaming. More shapes appeared, dozens of them, flowing out of the walls and floor like living nightmares. The camera showed Morgan falling to his knees, then curling up in a ball. Engineer Tethka's rock body began to crack as fear overwhelmed his nervous system. But something strange happened when the creatures approached the humans. On the recording, Nari watched as one of the shadow things flowed toward Taehyun. But instead of getting bigger and stronger like it did with the other species, the creature seemed to hesitate. It touched Taehyun, and he definitely reacted. His heart rate spiked, his breathing quickened, and sweat broke out on his skin, but he did not freeze. He did not curl up. He pulled out his weapon and started shooting. The energy blasts passed right through the creature, but something else happened. The shadow thing began to shrink. Its glow faded. And when Taehyun grabbed Morgan and started dragging him toward the exit, the creature actually backed away. They feed on fear, Jiho explained. Pure terror makes them stronger and bigger. But our fear... He paused, looking thoughtful. Our fear seemed to poison them somehow. On the screen, the recording showed Dr. Jiho helping the paralyzed liner crew while surrounded by the shadow creatures. They circled him like sharks, but they did not attack. Every time one of them touched him, it seemed to weaken. How is that possible? Nari asked. Taehyun and Jiho looked at each other. There was something in their eyes that Nari had never seen before. Not the absence of fear, but something else. Something that made the fear into a tool instead of a weapon against them. We do not know, Taehyun admitted. But we got everyone out. All 43 survivors from the liner. They are in medical bay now. Nari stared at the frozen image on the screen. A shadow creature recoiling from a human who was clearly terrified, but still fighting. It should not be possible. Fear was fear. Terror was terror. These creatures had been feeding in the nebula for who knew how long, growing fat on the panic of lost travelers. So why were they afraid of humans who were afraid of them? Commander, Vex called from the bridge communicator, we are receiving multiple distress signals from inside the nebula. It sounds like more ships are in trouble. Nari looked at her 2 human crew members. They were tired, shaken, but not broken. Whatever had happened in that nebula, they had faced cosmic horror and won. Prepare another shuttle, she ordered. We have more people to save. And for the first time since entering the nebula, she felt hope instead of dread. The emergency shelter was barely holding together. Commander Nari crouched behind a makeshift barrier of cargo containers, listening to the sounds outside. Scratching, flowing, whispers in languages that made her mind hurt. The shadow creatures were getting bolder, testing the barriers that kept them out. Most of her crew was dead or worse. Security Chief Morgan had recovered enough to help set up defenses, but Engineer Tethka was still catatonic from his encounter with the creatures. Communications Officer Vex had not spoken since they dragged him from the liner's bridge. His antenna hung limp, and his eyes stared at nothing. The only ones who seemed unaffected were the humans. Dr. Jiho was checking on the survivors they had rescued from the passenger liner. 43 beings from different species, all showing severe psychological trauma. Some rocked back and forth, muttering about the darkness. Others sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement would bring the creatures back. Marine Tae-hyun stood, guard at the shelter's main entrance, his weapon ready. Nari could see sweat on his face and the tight way he held his shoulders. He was scared. She could smell the fear hormones coming off him. But his hands were steady, and his eyes were alert. It made no sense. "How much longer can the barrier hold?" she asked Morgan. The big reptilian's scales were still pale from his earlier encounter. "Not long," he admitted. "The power cells are almost drained. Maybe 2 hours. 2 hours. And then the shadows would come for them all." Nari looked around the shelter. Her people were broken. The rescued civilians were in shock. She was the commanding officer, but she felt just as helpless as everyone else. The fear was eating at her mind, making it hard to think clearly. Outside, something scraped against the barrier. A sound like claws on metal, but softer, more liquid. One of the shadow creatures was testing for weaknesses. "They are getting impatient," Tae-hyun observed. He sounded calm, but Nari could see his heartbeat pounding in his neck. "How can you be so calm?" she asked him. "You face those things. You know what they can do." Tae-hyun glanced at her, surprised. "Calm? Commander, I am terrified. Those things out there are nightmare fuel, pure cosmic horror. My hands have not stopped shaking since we got back." He held up his weapon. Nari could see that he was right. His hands were trembling slightly, but his grip was firm, and his aim was steady. "Then how are you still fighting?" she demanded. "How? Are you not curled up in a corner like the rest of us?" Before Tae-hyun could answer, the lights flickered. The barrier was failing faster than expected. Through the translucent energy field, Nari could see shapes moving in the mist outside. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Dr. Jiho looked up from his patients. "Power failure?" he asked. "Barrier is at 15%, Morgan reported. "We have maybe 30 minutes. The shapes outside pressed closer." Nari could feel their hunger, their alien intelligence focused on the fear inside the shelter. They were feeding on the terror of her crew, growing stronger with every passing moment. She turned to Jiho, desperation making her voice sharp. "You faced them too. You went right into their nest to save people. Why are you not broken like the others?" Jiho set down his medical scanner and looked at her with tired eyes. "Commander, do you want the honest answer?" "Yes." "We are scared," he said simply. "We are terrified. Right now, I am more afraid than I have ever been in my life. My heart is racing, my hands are shaking, and part of my brain is screaming at me to run away and hide." He gestured to the survivors around them. But being scared never stopped a human from doing what needed to be done. Fear is just another kind of fuel for us. Nari stared at him. "Fuel?" "Think about it," Jiho continued. "Where do humans come from? Earth is a death world. Everything there tries to kill you. Natural disasters, predators, diseases, other humans. We evolved in constant danger." Tae-hyun nodded. My grandmother used to tell stories about the old days on Earth, before we had modern technology. People lived with fear every day. Fear of starvation, fear of disease, fear of being eaten by wild animals. But they did not give up. They kept going. So we learned something that maybe other species did not, Jiho added. We learned that the only way out is through. You cannot avoid fear, so you use it. You let it sharpen your senses and focus your mind. You let it remind you what you are fighting for. The barrier flickered again. 10% power remaining. The shadow creatures sensed weakness and pressed closer. I do not understand, Nari said. Fear should paralyze you. It should make you helpless. Only if you let it, Taehyun replied. Look, those things out there, they are scary because they are unknown, because they are powerful, because they can hurt us. But you know what? So was the saber-toothed tiger that hunted my ancestors. So was the ice age that nearly killed our species. So were the plagues and wars and disasters that should have wiped us out a dozen times over. He checked his weapon's power level. But we are still here. And you know why? Because when our ancestors got scared, they did not freeze up. They grabbed rocks and sharp sticks and fought back. They built fires to keep the darkness away. They told stories to remember the ones they lost. Dr. Jiho was preparing medical supplies, his movements quick and efficient despite his obvious fear. Those creatures feed on terror that paralyzes, but human fear does not paralyze. It energizes. It makes us fight harder, think faster, care more about protecting the people we love. 5% power. The shadows were almost touching the barrier now. That is why they cannot feed on us properly, Taehyun explained. Our fear tastes wrong to them. It is not pure terror. It is terror mixed with determination. Terror mixed with love for our friends. Terror mixed with stubborn refusal to give up. The barrier failed. Darkness flowed into the shelter like a living tide. The shadow creatures poured through the opening, their alien forms writhing with hunger. The rescued civilians screamed. Morgan tried to raise his weapon, but froze when the creature's influence hit him. But the humans moved. Taehyun opened fire, his shots passing through the creatures, but somehow still affecting them. They recoiled from his position, confused by his response to their psychic attack. Dr. Jiho grabbed Nari and pulled her behind cover. Stay close to us, he said. Whatever you do not give in to despair. Fight it. Use it. Nari felt the creature's influence washing over her. Whispers of meaninglessness, of inevitable death, of the futility of hope. But she watched the humans, saw how they acknowledged the fear and then kept moving anyway. And slowly she began to understand. The creatures were starving around the humans. Their terror was the wrong kind of food. It was not helpless panic, but motivated action. Not surrender, but resistance. Why are you not scared? She had asked. But that was the wrong question. The right question was, why does being scared not stop you? And now she was beginning to learn the answer. The shelter was chaos. Shadow creatures flowed through the broken barrier like liquid nightmares, their forms shifting between solid and gas. Most of the crew had collapsed into terror-induced paralysis, but Commander Nari forced herself to stay, focused on the humans. Taehyun moved through the darkness with impossible calm, his weapon fire driving the creatures back, even though the energy beams passed right through them. Dr. Jiho was pulling survivors to safety, his hands steady despite the fear she could smell pouring off him. This way, Jiho called to her. We need to get deeper into the nebula. Deeper? Nari could barely speak through her terror. That is where more of them will be. Exactly, Taehyun said, reloading his weapon. These things have a nest somewhere, a central point, where they are strongest. If we can find it, we can figure out how to stop them permanently. The idea was insane, running toward the source of cosmic horror instead of away from it. But as Nari watched a shadow creature recoil, From Taehyun's approach, she realized that human insanity might be their only hope. "How do we get there?" she asked. "The old-fashioned way," Dr. Jiho replied. "We walk through hell and hope we come out the other side." They gathered the survivors who could still move. Morgan had recovered enough to help, though his scales were still pale with shock. Engineer Tethika remained catatonic, so they carried him. Communications Officer Vex could walk, but would not speak. The journey through the nebula was a nightmare. The purple mist grew thicker as they moved deeper, and the shadow creatures were everywhere. They flowed through the corridors of derelict. Ships lurked in the wreckage of destroyed vessels and whispered from the darkness between stars. But something strange was happening. The creatures followed them, drawn by the fear of the non-human crew members. But they would not get too close to Taehyun and Jiho. They circled like sharks, feeding on the terror around the humans, but unable to approach directly. "They are confused," Nari observed. "Your fear should make them stronger, but it is having the opposite effect." "It is the type of fear," Jiho explained as he helped a wounded civilian walk. "Most species evolved fear as a warning system. When something is dangerous, fear tells them to avoid it, but humans evolved fear as a preparation system." "What do you mean?" Taehyun answered while scanning for threats ahead. "When a human gets scared, our bodies prepare for action. Heart rate increases to pump more blood. Breathing quickens to provide more oxygen. Adrenaline sharpens our senses and blocks pain. Fear does not tell us to run away. It tells us to get ready to fight." They reached the center of the nebula, where the mist was so thick it was like walking through soup. Here, floating in the purple darkness, was a massive structure. It looked like a ship, but it was the size of a small moon. Its hull was covered in the same flowing shadows that made up the creatures. "The nest," Jiho breathed. The structure pulsed with dark energy. Nari could feel the psychic pressure coming from it, waves of despair and terror that made her knees weak. This was where the creatures came from. This was their source. "How do we destroy something like that?" Morgan asked, his voice shaking. "We do not destroy it," Taehyun said. "We poison it." He and Jiho looked at each other, and Nari saw something pass between them. A decision made without words. "What are you planning?" she demanded. "Those things feed on fear," Jiho explained. "Pure, paralyzing terror. But human fear is different. It is active, motivated. If we can get close enough to the source, our fear might contaminate their entire feeding system." "That is suicide," Nari protested. "The psychic pressure near that thing will drive you insane." "Maybe," Taehyun admitted. "But maybe not. Humans have been dealing with insanity for a long time. Some of our greatest artists and scientists were considered crazy by their societies. We learned to function even when our minds were not working normally." They approached the massive structure. With every step, the psychic pressure increased. Nari felt her sanity slipping away, her thoughts becoming confused and fragmented. Morgan collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by visions of cosmic horror. But the humans kept walking. Their fear was visible now. Sweat poured down their faces. Their hands shook so badly they could barely hold their equipment. But they did not stop. They walked into the heart of terror itself, carrying their fear like a weapon. "I do not understand," Nari gasped, fighting to stay conscious. "How are you doing this?" "Practice," Jiho replied through gritted teeth. "Every human child learns to be afraid of the dark and then walk through it anyway. We tell stories about monsters and then go to sleep knowing they might be real. We watch horror movies for fun. We make fear our friend," Taehyun added. "Because if you can be scared and still function, then nothing can really stop you." They reached the structure's hull. Up close, Nari could see that it was not metal but something organic. It pulsed like a living heart, and the shadows flowing across its surface were actually veins carrying liquid terror to feed the creatures throughout the nebula. Taehyun placed his hand on the hull, The moment he made contact, the entire structure shuddered. The shadow veins flickered, and a sound like screaming echoed through the nebula. "It is working," Jiho said in amazement. "Our fear is poisoning their system." Dr. Jiho placed his hand next to Tae-hyun's. The structure shuddered again, more violently this time. Throughout the nebula, shadow creatures began to dissipate like smoke. The psychic pressure was breaking down, replaced by something else. Confused. Hunger. The creatures did not understand what was happening to them. They had fed on pure terror for millennia, growing fat on the helplessness of their victims. But human fear was not helpless. It was active, determined, mixed with love and hope and stubborn refusal to give up. It was poison to beings that fed on despair. "The nest is collapsing," Nari observed. The massive structure was losing cohesion, its organic hull breaking apart. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Taehyun replied, "but long enough." They ran back through the dissolving nebula, carrying the survivors and dodging chunks of falling debris. Behind them, the creature's nest fell apart like a house of cards. The purple mist began to clear, and the psychic pressure faded. By the time they reached their shuttle, the Maelstrom Nebula was just empty space filled with ordinary stellar debris. The creatures were gone, starved to death by a type of fear they could not digest. As they flew back to the new dawn, Nari looked at the two humans who had just defeated cosmic horror through sheer bloody-mindedness. "You were terrified the entire time," she said. "It was not a question." "Absolutely," Jiho confirmed. "I have never been so scared in my life." "But you kept going anyway." "Of course," Taehyun said, as if it was obvious. "Being scared does not mean you stop doing your job. It just means you do your job while scared." Nari began to understand that humans were not brave because they lacked fear. They were brave because fear did not control them. They had learned to carry terror like a tool, to let it sharpen their focus instead of breaking their will, and that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. 3 weeks later, Commander Nari stood before the full assembly of the Galactic Council. Representatives from over 200 species filled the massive chamber, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. The air recyclers worked overtime to handle the different atmospheric requirements of so many different beings. Nari had never addressed the full council before. As a ship commander, she usually dealt with local authorities and trade officials. But her report about the Maelstrom Nebula had reached the highest levels of government, and now everyone wanted to hear what she had to say. "Commander Nari of the vessel New Dawn," announced the council speaker, an ancient being whose species had been part of the Federation for over 1,000 years. "You have filed a report claiming that humans possess unique psychological resistance to psychic predators. Please explain." Nari activated the holographic display and began her presentation. Images from the nebula filled the air above the chamber. Derelict ships, shadow creatures, the massive nest structure that had fed on fear for millennia. "For over 300 years, the Maelstrom Nebula has been a dead zone," she began. "Ships that entered either disappeared completely or were found empty, their crews missing or dead from extreme psychological trauma. We now know this was caused by entities that fed on fear itself." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Many species had lost ships to the nebula over the centuries. My crew encountered these entities during a rescue mission. Most of my people, including myself, were quickly overwhelmed by the psychic attack. The creatures feed on pure terror, growing stronger as their victims become more helpless. She played recordings from the mission, showing shadow creatures overwhelming alien crew members and growing larger as they fed. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. However, the human members of my crew showed an unusual resistance to these effects. The recordings changed, showing Taehyun and Jiho facing the creatures. The council watched in fascination as the humans fought back despite being clearly terrified. "At first, I believed humans simply felt less fear than other species," Nari continued. But this was incorrect. Humans experience fear as strongly as any other species. The difference is in how they respond to that fear. Captain Hana of the Velthari Intelligence Corps leaned forward in her seat. She had been the one to run the original psychological tests on humans. Commander, are you saying our initial assessments were wrong? Completely wrong, Nari confirmed. We assumed that humans were psychologically primitive because they did not show the expected fear responses. We thought they did not understand danger. But the truth is much more significant. She activated a new set of data displays showing brain scans and psychological profiles. Human fear responses are fundamentally different from those of other species. Where most beings evolved fear as an avoidance mechanism, humans evolved fear as a preparation mechanism. When a human becomes afraid, their body and mind prepare for action, not retreat. Dr. Yuna from the original testing team spoke up. But how is this possible? Fear is a survival instinct. It should make creatures avoid danger, not seek it out. That assumes their homeworld was a place where avoiding danger was possible, Nari replied. Earth is what we classify as a death world, a planet where survival required constantly facing deadly threats. Humans could not evolve to avoid danger because danger was everywhere. She showed images of Earth's natural disasters, predators, and environmental hazards. The council chamber fell silent as they realized the implications. Humans learned to function while afraid because they had no choice. Over millions of years, their species developed the ability to use fear as fuel rather than letting it paralyze them. This makes them uniquely resistant to psychic predators that rely on terror to subdue their victims. The recordings showed the climactic moment when Taehyun and Jiho touched the creature's nest, poisoning it with their active, determined fear. The entities in the Maelstrom Nebula could not process human fear because it was the wrong type of food. Instead of passive terror, they encountered active resistance. Instead of helplessness, they found determination. This poisoned their feeding system and caused their entire nest structure to collapse. Counselor Vextar of the Hive Mind Collective raised one of his many arms. Are you suggesting that humans are immune to fear-based attacks? Not immune, Nari clarified. They feel fear just as strongly as anyone else. But they have learned to function despite that fear. In fact, fear often makes them more effective, not less. She played the final recordings, showing the nebula clearing as the creatures died and the rescued survivors being brought to safety. I am recommending that the Council reassess humanity's role in the Federation. They are not a primitive species that needs protection. They are our best defense against threats that would paralyze other species through fear. The chamber erupted in discussion. Representatives argued in dozens of languages about the implications of Nari's report. Some were excited by the possibilities. Others were concerned about the military applications. The council speaker called for order. Commander Nari, what specific recommendations do you have? Create a new division within Federation security, she replied. Staff it with human volunteers and send them to investigate phenomena that other species cannot handle. There are regions of space we have avoided for centuries because they drive crews insane. Humans might be able to explore them safely, and if you are wrong, asked Counselor Jathera of the Crystal Communes, if humans are simply too primitive to understand the dangers they face. Nari thought about Taehyun and Jiho walking into the heart of cosmic horror, carrying their terror like a weapon. Then we will know very quickly. But I do not think I am wrong. The vote was closer than expected, but it passed. The Human Rapid Response Division was authorized with a budget and mandate to investigate impossible phenomena throughout Federation space. 2 hours after the council session ended, Nari found herself in a small conference room with Minho, the human who had taken the original psychological tests. He was being briefed on his new assignment as head of the Response Division. So let me get this straight. he said, reviewing the mission parameters. "You want us to go to the places that scare everyone else too much to investigate?" "Essentially, yes," Nari confirmed. Minho grinned. "Sounds like fun. When do we start?" Nari realized that she was no longer surprised by human responses to danger. They really were different from every other species in the galaxy, not because they lacked fear, but because they refused to let fear stop them. 3 months later, she received the first report from the Human Rapid Response Division. They had successfully investigated a haunted space station, made contact with entities from a parallel dimension, and solved the mystery of the screaming stars. In each case, the humans had been terrified, and in each case, they had done their job anyway. The galaxy was learning that humans were not brave because they were fearless. They were brave because being afraid did not make them stop, and that difference was about to change everything. Looking back, Nari realized that the question was never, "Why are not you scared, human?" The real question was, "How does being scared make you stronger?" And the answer to that question was reshaping the entire Federation's understanding of courage, fear, and what it meant to be truly brave in a universe full of horrors.